Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and due to massive requests by a load of y'all, I'm going to be going through the comments section on our most viral video right now and looking at some of the bots and responding to comments. It's been hilarious to see the kind of bots that have been coming in after the video blew up. It's nearly gotten 190,000 views right now, so let's hop over there and let's see what kind of comments we got. So starting off, Jet Fusion said, and Putin needs to pay his soldiers. Plot twist. I don't really know how that's a plot twist, but I guess so. Brian Wies said, you're making a lot of assumptions with your numbers. For example, you're assuming that they have retained the same amount of personnel in theater throughout the whole conflict. Well, yeah, I am, because there's only so many soldiers you can fit into a front line before you start to crowd it. And there's I guess you could say troop density. You can only get troops so packed in and units so close to each other before you're just asking for people to get killed all over the place for no reason. So that's why we are largely assuming that the original invasion force is the largest it could get, and you can't really add any more soldiers beyond that into the front line or the theater, considering that the front line is also shrunk in half. You can't do that and make any meaningful conclusions. Well, we can, and I did. There's quite a bit more than that. Not really. You're also assuming that their logistics work like ours do when we know their logistics have been crap since day one. They have been crap since day one, but you largely have to assume that things around the world are average. If a soldier has to eat, you have to feed them. It's not really going to change. It's not like the Russians get fed through some kind of a straw. Well, some of them do now, but it's not like all of them at the start are getting fed through a straw. So they get fed the same way. You have to still transport the supplies by a truck or by train to the front line and then by truck the rest of the way. So hope that addresses that one. A. Bracken said, if the Russians are doing this badly, I don't understand why the forces of the Kiev regime hasn't thrown them out like the bot. You can see a bot right there by calling Kiev a regime. Hasn't thrown them out long ago. By the way, where's the quote where Putin says his army won't serve winter? That's when you really know this is a Russian. And real quick, let's click on their account. And when was their account made? Actually, a long time ago. So that's pretty interesting, but still, they can't spell. 11 years. Well, actually, yeah, 11 years of being on YouTube, they still can't spell. They might want to work on that. But then again, I can't talk because I misspell a million things in my live chat descriptions. My stream descriptions. Anyways, if the Russians are doing that, I think that's hilarious because this guy is acting like it's Ukraine's responsibility to have defeated them within a month. It was Russia's responsibility to annex Ukraine within 3 days. If they're doing so good, then how come the Moscow regime didn't win the war in 3 days or a week like they said at the start? Answer that for me, and I'll answer the rest of it. Let's see, Anthony Evans, third world only refers to countries that don't align with the Russian bloc or the allied blocs. It has nothing to do with the type of government or financial stability of the country or anything like that. Actually, it somewhat does. Third world countries largely didn't have any kind of economic support or really had a lot of access to world markets like the US or Western market or the Soviet or Eastern sphere market. And so largely they would end up becoming poor for that reason. And so that's why third world kind of refers to really backwards countries. Back in the day, actually, there was the first world countries, which were the Western world, the United States, the Europeans, and so on. And then there were the second world countries, which were communist in nature, usually aligned directly with the Soviet Union. And I believe the Chinese were also lopped into there as well. Really, anyone that was communist was lopped into the second world group. And then the third world were countries largely in Central America, South America, and Africa, because largely they just for some reason never picked up an economic activity for one reason or another during the 20th century. So I hope that answers that. History is littered with scholars who have underestimated Russia. Yeah, I know. There's many who have underestimated Russia. Like the Russo-Japanese War, where they got beasted on by the Japanese, and they were literally an isolationist country that was so backwards just 40 years before that. Yeah, they underestimated them then. They should have given the Russians the leeway and said they would have won with flying colors. And also in Chechnya, during the first Chechen War, the Russians should have won with flying colors. I'm sure that they underestimated them then. I'm sure they could have done a lot better if people just believed in them and sent some hopes and prayers their way. And also in Afghanistan too. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, I get what you're saying. In some instances, that's somewhat true, but in others, it's not. Like, if you look at any of the wars that Russia's won, they originally started off on the defensive. Like, for example, in the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon marched into Russia because they were a member of the coalition at the time, and so the Russians were on the defensive during that entire war until they defeated Napoleon, and really the weather defeated Napoleon, and then they came in and wiped him out. And then during the Second World War, they started off the war against the Germans as a defensive war, and then later on they went into the offensive once the weather had once again beat down the Germans with their poor logistics, and the Russians had thrown enough bodies at them that they started running out of ammo. So not really a true statement, and you can underestimate Russia a lot because honestly, they're not that impressive. Let's see, Beetles for sale. I wonder if this guy sells beetles. Anyways, to me, it means the Russians aren't moving until the spring. They want to build up their stock of weapons for spring, so Ukraine definitely needs to remain on the offensive. I do think that Ukraine needs to eventually get on the offensive again. We actually made a video talking about that today. But at the same time, there is no way for them to really build up stocks of weapons beyond small and technologically limited weapons like AK-47s, AK-74s, AKMs, and RPG-7s. They don't really make AK-47s anymore. But anyways, we're not going down that rabbit hole. But they want to build up their stock of weapons for the spring. Beyond those weapons, the small arms that I just talked about, they really can't make anything. They can't make new fighter aircraft because the technology needed for that they don't have, because that was imported before, and now imports are completely blocked off in that regard, so they can't make those. And they really can't make anything technologically complex that would actually help them out in this war, so they're either stuck repairing old stuff or making technologically inferior stuff, like small arms, RPGs, and so on. Imagine 1,000 man lying on a 150Y highway, partially a higway, actually. Sorry, it's not a highway, it's a higway, partially stripped in pieces. We never changed. We have just more technology on us. Unfortunately, I don't know what that means. Anyways, come on, bro. Come on, man. 100,000 KIA on Russian side and hundreds of thousands wounded? Bro, you got to do your homework a little bit better if you have a YouTube channel. Well, I hate to say it, but we've been doing our homework quite well. In fact, I think it's better than you. I wonder how old this account is, because this is always a question to me. How old is this account? Actually, somewhat old again. Pretty interesting. But to answer this question, well, to really just address the statement, we do nothing but research on this channel. That's why these videos come out. We get these reports directly from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Now, I'm not going to sit there and take the word of someone like General Milley, who's getting these numbers from who knows where, pulling them out of the ether, and then you got Ursula von der Leyen or whoever who's pulling numbers out of thin air. We don't really know where they're getting their numbers from. But one thing we know is that the Ukrainian numbers are fairly accurate, because at the early part of the war, at one point, they said that there were 10,000 Russian killed, and 2 weeks later, the Russian government came out and said that 10,000 Russian soldiers had been killed. And we know that, of course, they're skewing the numbers one way. We know that the Ukrainians are skewing the numbers the other. But by and large, it seems like at that point, the casualty reports, or the fatality reports alone, were incredibly accurate. So for that reason, those numbers still are probably fairly accurate, plus or minus a couple of thousand. Pinball said, great review, time for Ukrainian counteroffensive. I'd say it's been interesting to see how crap Russia and its military are. Third world barbarians, basically. Thank you so much for the support, Pinball. I don't know why I said Pinball, but I thank you so much for enjoying the video, and it was fun to make. We also made another video literally covering this topic today, so make sure to go check it out, because it was a pretty good one in my opinion. But anyways, moving on. As I understand, one of the reasons Russia has such a high level of KIAs is the poor medical assistance at the front lines. Rumor has it that the Russians themselves rather shoot badly injured soldiers than to try and save them, because they don't want to waste time. That is not necessarily true. We have seen them take a lot of efforts. Very rarely do we ever see them offing any of their wounded. It seems that sometimes they just don't get medical attention and they bleed to death out there. Other times we've actually seen Russians committing suicide. I haven't been able to show that ever on this channel, but we see that in the background where we're watching the videos making the news. So that is kind of true in a way, but they don't really have like death squads going around and executing the wounded like there's some kind of a racehorse. But it's close. I'm not going to say that's wrong. That's very close to what's really happening. Yup, as I though, not a biased view from someone that knows jack crap about current conflicts and believes in Western propaganda. I gotta know how old this account is. It's always the question. Okay, that one's actually a little bit old too. Kind of weird. Biased news. I guess this person believes the biased news of the other direction, the one where Russia is the best country on earth, and the 3-day special military operation is only entering its second day, and they're just winning right now. It's really hard to even respond to a comment like that, because knows jack crap about the current conflict. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I've been doing this as a full-time job for 60 hours a week for 10 months. Do you know more than me? I would be pretty surprised at this point. But anyways, moving on. Please tell me no one actually believed the 93,000 number. That number is made up by Ukraine itself, which shouldn't take as a large overestimate. I don't know. All the bodies I see in the videos where there's just dozens of dead Russians in a single area tends to make me believe that that number is fairly accurate. You shouldn't believe anything that comes out of Russia or Ukraine's mouth. Both want to make it seem like they're doing better than they actually are. But at the same time, we know that the Ukrainians are largely giving a very accurate number on the Russian casualty report, but in all fairness, the Ukrainians don't give a report on how many casualties they've taken. Of course, probably don't want to because it'd be a little bit demoralizing to know how much it's really costing. It's probably somewhere around 20 to 30,000 killed, and we don't know how many wounded, but that's the cost of war. But we do know that the Russians are taking a much higher number because they're the ones taking under offensive action against non-attrited units. The Ukrainian units never took attrition that weakened their numbers. They never did any kind of breakthroughs or sweeping maneuvers around Ukrainian forces. They're always running headlong into perfect condition Ukrainian fighting forces, so we know that they're taking high casualties because that alone is a hellhole, a terrible situation to get into, and it's the worst case scenario, and the Russians go into that with that in mind is the best case scenario. So we know that that number is probably fairly accurate. Once again, not completely accurate. It's not an exact count, plus or minus a couple of thousand in either direction, but it's very close. Let's see. So-and-so said the same things as this channel. Did not look good for him. I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, that guy, I don't think that guy is saying what we're saying. That's kind of interesting. Anyways, there's no doubt about the Russians suffering huge losses, but you're nonetheless making one false assumption in this video. Your calculations can only hold true if the aim would be to have as many troops as the original force. Well, based off of the casualty numbers and the wounded, mobilizing another 300,000 men means that they're just replacing the ones that have been killed and wounded. So they're not really adding any numbers to their forces. If anything, they like even if you go and make new units out of these 300,000 guys, you've already lost the other 300,000 guys that were there. So you're really just ending up replacing them, although they may be new units on paper. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is, man. Anyways, it really looks like Zap Brannigan is running the show, sending in wave after wave of men to their death. If you're talking about the Russians, yes, I would agree. Most of them are there, meat grinder. It is a meat grinder, it's terrible. Putin's secret army, old babushka dressed farmers, clothes to save the soldiers. Okay. Putin's slowing down, time for the West to up the tempo. Go around the river and cut Crimea off from the rest. More Russian call-ups mean more Russian discord. How long can Putin stay in power? I don't think that the Ukrainians can operate that quickly. That would be a little that would be a little bit too optimistic because if they go around the river, and let me see, actually, for some reason I'm in Japan on that Google image. But if they go around the river, and I'm assuming it's the Dnipro River, that would take a lot of effort, and that's something that I don't think they could do without taking heavy casualties and being defeated. So it's a nice idea, but I don't think it would be practical in actual practice. But moving on to the next one, let's see. For some reason, it skipped up. Great, very interesting perspective that no source said so far. That's true, and also something that I think a lot of the bots are trying to get me for is saying that Putin didn't say exactly that they can't survive the winter, which is true. He didn't actually say that, but all of what he said, all of the bullcrap that came out of his mouth, pretty much summarized that perfectly. If you can't use your forces at full strength, and you're sitting there and saying our forces are going to have to take a step back and fight out the war from an arm's length away, that means that they would not survive the winter otherwise. And so he's going to have to sit there and start babying them and treating them like the incompetent force that they are, so that way they can at least get through the winter okay, and then get into the spring, and then that'll be a whole problem on its own. So that is a pretty interesting point. I haven't seen anyone bring that up so far around in this channel. Hopefully someone else will bring that up. Let's see, moving on, there appear to be other youths who are not part of the 300,000, the annual youth conscripts, which are supposed to be only used in support. Forces have been brought later from other regions that were guarding the borders, etc., and an unknown number of volunteers and prisoners have been coming in. This is all true, actually. We don't know how many additional forces have been added just from volunteers or voluntolds, so added on to the 300,000, they could actually build up a little bit of a force off of those people, but that's not still going to be a massive number. It's going to be somewhere probably in the tens of thousands, maybe on the low tens of thousands, like 20, 30,000 maybe. Let's see. Allied combined GDP 50 trillion, Russia 1.4, and that's true. And the economic side of things is incredibly important. Ace of Spades. It could be the end of the conflict on the anniversary. The Russians are destroying their future for the next 25 years. I agree with that. They're really screwing themselves over, and considering that they've lost most of their offensive abilities because a large amount of their artillery and tanks have been knocked out, they will entirely be focusing on defensive side of things in the future, and they're going to have to change their doctrine as a whole because they can't work off of Soviet doctrine because they don't have the vehicles to do it anymore. Thanks, great video. Cheers from British Columbia. Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much, V. As much as men, Russia is running out of money and missiles. Now, that is something that we didn't really cover in that video, but that is also a very important topic, is just running out of the economic ability to carry out a war in general. Wars are incredibly expensive, and one of the reasons why the Ukrainians have been doing fairly well is that the West has been giving them massive amounts of economic support, which is something that no one's been giving the Russians. And so while the Ukrainians have been able to bleed money a lot slower than the Russians are literally just throwing money out the window into a giant bonfire. John Marcus Enforcer doesn't know how to do analysis and is so biased. What is said in his videos is basically worthless. I'm on Ukraine's side, but spreading misinformation like this serves nobody but Russia. How does it serve nobody but Russia? Tell me how a 10-month war serves Russia. Tell me that. And also, so biased. How is it biased? We're literally looking at the situation as it is. And then, of course, I was going to read this whole thing. I actually saw this one earlier. But if I click down on it, it's a small mini essay. And we don't have time to read that, so we're going to be moving on to a couple of more. And Ukraine lost 100,000 killed and 200,000 casualties. Even Ursula von Leyen admitted this. So, who's Ursula von Leyen? Let's pull that up real quick, because this is a very interesting point. Ursula von Leyen. Or von der Leyen, which is the actual spelling of the name. Let's see here. A German politician who has been serving as the president of the European Commission since 2019. So really no one that's involved in the actual Ukraine war, just some person in the European Union on the administrative side of things that came up with a number. So is that accurate? Not really. I mean, how in the world do they even vet those numbers? They can't. That's just another baseless estimate. Let's see. Good, the more Russia suffers, the sooner this insane war is over. Lord Ukraine. That's true. The harder the Russians are hit each and every day, the quicker this war will end. A lot of people don't get that, or the bots don't get it, one or the other. Let's see. In Modern Warfare, you're looking at a tooth to tail ratio or something like that, more like 10 to 1 if you want things to run smoothly, which isn't very smooth, even with a 10 to 1 ratio. And largely, the number I'm going off of 5 to 1 was actually explained to me by someone who is a 92 Alpha, and the military, they said that the logistical, I guess you could say, composition of their unit was something like 5 to 1. So a lot of people have been giving me higher numbers like 8 to 1, 10 to 1, but from what I've heard, it's 5 to 1. But although I would assume it would get higher eventually, especially considering that the United States is heavily supply focused, if anything. It's possible they pulled their best, most experienced units off the front line, so let the Ukrainians waste their valuable ordnance. That's not the case. Wars are supposed to end as fast as possible. It's not one's intent to try and just drag out a war for years. You always try and make them as quick as you can, and the fact that this has gone on for 10 months shows that the experienced units have already either been on the front lines and destroyed or killed off, one or the other, and they're no longer able to help change the situation. And so with that, I hope y'all enjoyed me reading a couple of these comments. Of course, this is just scraping the surface. There are thousands of comments on this video. I believe there is actually around literally 1,000 of them. So I can't read them all, but I hope y'all enjoy me addressing some of the comments, both good and some bots, and just some negative comments in general. And if you did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. And also, make sure to support us on Patreon if you want to see more content like this. And so I thank you all so much once again, and I will see you all in the next video.